When I stepped into the courtroom, my daughter snickered, and my son-in-law just shook his head. The judge turned ashen, his hand shaking as he murmured, "My God, is that really him?" Everyone pivoted and stared. It wasn't until that day that they discovered who I really was. Can you imagine the betrayal? The sheer, gut-wrenching shock of seeing your own daughter, in a courtroom, whispering cruel jokes about you while her husband smirked, all because they thought they'd finally broken you? They saw a helpless old man. But what they didn't know was that the helpless old man they were trying to bury was actually a federal judge about to deliver his final, crushing verdict. This wasn't just a legal battle. This was a war for my very life, and it began 3 months earlier, on the day I buried my wife, Catherine. The grass at the cemetery was still damp with morning rain, and the cloying scent of lilies made me nauseous. I stood there, alone, a glass of scotch in my hand that tasted like ash. 4 to 5 years with Catherine. She was my anchor, my conscience, the only one who could soften my sharp edges. Without her, I felt like a ship cut loose in a storm. But even as I stood there, saying goodbye to the love of my life, my daughter, Victoria, and her husband, Jared, were already calculating their inheritance. I watched them at the wake from across the room. Victoria wasn't crying. She was meticulously checking her makeup in a compact mirror. Jared wasn't comforting her. He was circling my library, running his hands over my antique books, assessing their value like an auctioneer. I have excellent hearing, a trait I've always kept hidden, just as I'd learned to hide my sharp mind behind a mask of grief. I quietly moved toward the hallway, positioning myself behind a pillar. "It's a big house," Jared whispered, his voice low, thick with greed. 4.5 million. Easy. The market in Lake Forest is booming. Victoria sighed, not with sadness, but impatience. "We have to move fast, Jared. Dad's already losing it. Did you see him staring at the coffin? He's checking out. We need to get power of attorney before he spends it all on charity or something stupid." "We'll move in next week," Jared replied, a plan already forming. "We'll tell him it's to take care of him. Once we're inside, we control the environment. We control the mail, the phone, the accounts. He won't even know what hit him." My grip tightened on my glass. I thought it would shatter. My wife wasn't even cold in the ground, and they were already planning a hostile takeover of my life. They didn't see me as a father. They saw me as an obstacle to a $4 million payday. I stepped out from behind the pillar, and they both jumped, startled. "Dad!" Victoria exclaimed, her voice instantly switching to that sickly sweet tone that made my skin crawl. "We were just saying how worried we are about you. You shouldn't be alone in this big house." I stayed at her, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make them deeply uncomfortable. "I'm not alone, Victoria," I finally said. "I have memories." Jared stepped forward, clapping a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy, condescending. "That's the thing, Harry. Memories don't pay the bills or maintain a property like this. We want to help. We're going to stay for a while, just to get you settled." I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just turned and walked away. I knew if I spoke then, I would evict them on the spot. But the judge in me knew you don't file charges until you've built a case. I needed to see how far they would go. I didn't have to wait long. The first strike came less than 48 hours later. I was in the garage, polishing the chrome on my pride and joy, a 1967 Shelby Mustang GT500, midnight blue with white racing stripes. I bought that car the year I passed the bar exam. It wasn't just a car. It was a symbol of my independence, my history, valued at over $220,000. To me, it was priceless. Jared walked into the garage, eating an apple, chewing loudly. "Nice car, Harry. Shame it just sits here gathering dust." "I drive it every Sunday," I said, not looking up from the fender I was buffing. "Yeah, about that," Jared said, leaning against the doorframe. "Victoria and I were talking. We think it's unsafe for you to be driving a beast like this. You know, with your vision and your reflexes slowing down, you could hurt someone, or yourself." "My vision is 20/20ths with my glasses, Jared, and my reflexes are just fine." He chuckled, a dismissive sound. "Come on, Harry. Be realistic. You're 70. You shouldn't be behind the wheel of a muscle car. Give me the keys. I'll take it to a mechanic I know in the city, get it winterized, maybe put it in long-time storage for you, save you the insurance money. I stood up, wiping the grease from my hands with a rag. I looked at him. This was a test. He was testing my boundaries. No, I said, my voice calm, steady. The car stays here. Nobody drives it but me. Jared's smile didn't reach his eyes. He stared at me for a moment, his jaw tightening. Have it your way, old man. Just trying to help. He walked away, but I felt a prickle of unease on the back of my neck. That night, I locked the garage with a heavy deadbolt. I put the keys in my bedside drawer, underneath my revolver. I went to sleep feeling uneasy, the kind of instinct that wakes you up at 3 a.m. And sure enough, the next morning, the silence in the house felt wrong. I went downstairs, made my coffee, and walked to the garage. The side door was unlocked. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pushed the door open. The spot where my Shelby Mustang had sat for 40 years was empty. Just a rectangle of clean concrete where the car used to be, and a small oil stain. I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. I walked back into the kitchen where Jared was sitting at the table, eating a bowl of cereal as if it was a normal Tuesday. Victoria was scrolling on her tablet. "Where's my car?" I asked, my voice low, controlled. Jared didn't even look up. "I told you, hurry. I took it in for service. I did you a favor. I woke up early, so the tires looked a little low, and thought, let me help the old guy out. It's at the shop." "Which shop?" I asked. "Give me the number." "Oh, it's a guy in Chicago. Don't worry about it. I'll handle the paperwork. You just relax. You have enough on your plate, grieving mom." I looked at him. I looked at the way he avoided my eyes. I looked at Victoria, who was stubbornly refusing to look up from her screen. I walked back upstairs to my bedroom and opened the drawer. The keys to the Mustang were still there, exactly where I had left them. Jared hadn't taken the car with the keys. He had hot-wired it. Or he had forced the ignition. He hadn't taken it to a shop. You don't steal a car at 5 a.m. to take it to a shop without the owner's permission. He had sold it, or he was stripping it for parts. He had stolen my property right from under my nose and lied to my face, using my age as a shield, thinking I would just accept that I was too forgetful to remember if I gave him permission or not. I stood by the window, looking out at the empty driveway. A cold, hard resolve settled in my chest. They thought they were dealing with a grieving, confused old pensioner. They thought they had just taken a toy away from a child. But they had just committed grand theft auto. They had just crossed the line from ungrateful children to criminals. I didn't call the police. Not yet. The police would just call it a civil dispute. They would say, "Here's your son-in-law. He says he's helping you." No. I needed more. If I was going to take them down, I needed undeniable proof. I needed to let them think they were winning. I closed the drawer. I went back downstairs and sat opposite Jared. "Thank you, Jared," I said, forcing my voice to sound weak and defeated. "I suppose you're right. My eyes aren't what they used to be. Maybe it's better if I don't drive." Jared smacked at Victoria. "See? I told you he'd understand." They exchanged a look of triumph. They thought I had surrendered. They had no idea that I had just declared war. And the Mustang was just the first casualty. The silence of the house didn't last long. It was replaced by the frantic, chaotic energy of an occupation. That's what this was. It was not a family moving in to care for an elderly relative. It was an occupation, seizing territory. The next casualty, after my car, was my last link to humanity within these walls, Mrs. Higgins. She had been our housekeeper for 30 years. She had ironed my judicial robes when I was sworn in. She had held Catherine's hand when the chemotherapy made her too weak to stand. She wasn't staff. She was the keeper of this house's history. But to Victoria and Jared, she was a witness. And witnesses needed to be eliminated. It happened in the library. I was sitting in my leather armchair, pretending to stare vacantly at a wall, a performance I was perfecting hour by hour. Victoria stormed in, her heels clicking aggressively on the hardwood floor. She was holding a tarnished silver spoon, one of the antique pieces from Catherine's grandmother's set. Mrs. Higgins followed her, looking small and terrified, twisting her apron in her hands. "You're stealing from us!" Victoria shrieked, her voice shrill, theatrical. "I found this in your bag. Don't lie to me." Mrs. Higgins was trembling. "Miss Victoria, I would never. I was polishing them. I must have put it in my pocket by mistake when the phone rang. I've worked here for 30 years. Mr. Harrison knows me." She looked at me, her eyes pleading, desperate for the man she knew to step forward and defend her. "Mr. Harrison, please tell her." I gripped the armrest of my chair. Every fiber of my being wanted to stand up, to use my courtroom voice, the voice that had silenced mob bosses and corrupt senators, and order my daughter to get out of my house. I wanted to tell Mrs. Higgins that she was untouchable, but I couldn't. If I showed strength now, they would be on guard. They would cover their tracks. To catch them, I had to be the victim. I had to let them believe I was gone. I looked at Mrs. Higgins, forcing my eyes to look glassy and confused. "Who's stealing?" I mumbled, my voice trembling. "Where is Catherine? Catherine will sort it out." Victoria let out a scoff. "He doesn't even know what day it is." She turned back to Mrs. Higgins, her face twisting into a sneer. "You're fired. Get your things and get out now, or I call the police." Mrs. Higgins began to sob. It was a broken, devastating sound. She didn't argue. She knew who held the power now. She turned to leave, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "Wait," I said. It came out softer than I intended, but it stopped them. I struggled to stand up, leaning heavily on my cane, feigning a tremor in my legs. "I want to say goodbye." Victoria rolled her eyes. "Fine, make it quick. She's a thief, Dad. Don't let her touch you." I shuffled over to Mrs. Higgins. She looked at me with such pity, such sadness. She thought I was lost. She thought I had abandoned her. I pulled her into a hug, a clumsy old man's hug. As I did, I slipped my hand into her apron pocket. I had been carrying a check for $10,000 and a small note in my pocket for 2 days, knowing this moment would come. I had written the check from an old account they didn't know about. I leaned in close, my mouth near her. Under the pretense of a confused whisper, I spoke with absolute clarity. "Take the money. Call the number on the paper. Do not speak to anyone else. Wait for my signal. I trust you." I felt her stiffen. She pulled back slightly. Intelligence. She realized the lights were still on. She blinked, wiping her tears, and gave a tiny, imperceptible nod. "Goodbye, Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice steady now. "You take care of yourself." She walked out with her head held high. Victoria slammed the door behind her, locking it with a satisfying click. "That's better," she said, dusting off her hands as if she had just taken out the trash. "Now we can get some people in here who we can actually trust. People who know their place." Phase 1 of isolation was complete. Phase 2 began before lunch. Jared walked into the living room with a bundle of cables in his hand. He had a fake smile plastered on his face, the kind a used car salesman wears when he knows the transmission is about to blow. "Hey, Harry," he said, cheerful and loud. "I was thinking, all this noise, the phone ringing, the news, the internet, it's too much stress for you. The doctor said you need peace, quiet, so I did you a favor." He held up the cables. They were the cords to the landline phones, every single one of them. "I disconnected the home phones," he continued. "No more telemarketers bothering you. And I changed the Wi-Fi password. You don't need to be staring at screens all day. It's bad for your brain. We need to focus on your rest." He wasn't suggesting it. He was informing me. He had severed my lines of communication with the outside world. He had turned my own home into a bunker. "But," I stammered, trying to sound pathetic, "what if I need to call someone? What if I need help?" Jared patted my shoulder. "That's what we're here for, Harry. You need something, you ask us. We're your connection now. You don't need to talk to anyone else. Who would you call anyway? All your friends are dead or retired. We're your family. We're all you have." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. He was smiling while he suffocated me. He was telling me I was a prisoner for my own good. I looked at the cables in his hand. He thought he had cut me off. He didn't know about the burner phone I had taped inside the air vent in the master bathroom. He didn't know about the laptop I had hidden under the floorboards in the attic. He thought he was the warden. He didn't realize he was locked in here with me. "Thank you, Jared," I said, lowering my head. "You're right. The ringing, it hurts my head." "Good man," he said. "Now go rest. Dinner will be ready soon." Dinner! That was the final indignity of the day. The smell hit me first. It was rich, savory, rosemary, garlic, searing beef fat. It was the smell of a prime ribeye steak being cooked to perfection. My stomach growled. I hadn't eaten a proper meal since the funeral. I walked into the dining room. The table was set beautifully, crystal glasses, the good china. Victoria and Jared were sitting there, and in front of them were 2 massive steaks, perfectly seared, juices running onto the white porcelain. There was a bottle of my best Cabernet Sauvignon open on the table. I sat down at my usual spot at the head of the table. But there was no plate for me. Instead, there was a small plastic bowl. Inside was a grey, lumpy sludge. It looked like oatmeal that had been made with dirty dishwater. "What is this?" I asked, pointing a shaking finger at the bowl. Victoria cut a piece of steak, putting it in her mouth and chewing slowly, savoring it. "Oh, Dad, we read up on your condition. With your confusion and the stress, swallowing can be difficult. We don't want you to choke. It's an aspiration risk." I stared at her. My swallowing was fine. I had eaten a sandwich yesterday when they weren't looking. "This is porridge," she said, swallowing her steak. "It's fortified. It has all the nutrients you need. It's easier for you to digest. You don't want to get sick, do you?" Jared took a long sip of my wine. "It's for your own good, Harry. Steak is tough. You have old teeth. Eat up. It'll make you strong." I looked at the grey sludge. Then I looked at the steak. This wasn't about health. This was about dominance. They were reducing me to an infant. They were stripping away the last shreds of my dignity, forcing me to watch them feast on my wealth while I ate slop. They wanted me to break. They wanted me to beg. Or worse, they wanted me to get angry, to throw the bowl, to prove I was unstable so they could call the doctors. I picked up the spoon. My hand trembled, not from age, but from a rage so hot it felt like it was burning my throat. I forced the spoon into the sludge. I lifted it to my mouth. It tasted like wet cardboard and shame. I swallowed it. I took another bite. And another. I ate every single bite of that vile gruel while they watched, smirking, talking about the renovations they were planning for the kitchen. I kept my eyes on the bowl. I didn't let them see the cold calculation in my gaze. I needed fuel. Even garbage fuel was fuel. I needed strength for what was coming. After dinner, they sent me to bed like a naughty child. "Go rest, Dad," Victoria said. "We have friends coming over to celebrate the move. You need your sleep." I climbed the stairs, my cane thumping rhythmically. I went into my room and closed the door. I didn't turn on the light. I lay on the bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. Downstairs, the music started. I heard the pop of champagne corks. I heard laughter. Not just Jared and Victoria, but others. They were throwing a party. On the day they fired my housekeeper, stole my car, and fed me slop, they were having a housewarming party in a house they didn't own yet. To the new owners. I heard Jared shout. A chorus of cheers followed. "This place is amazing," a stranger's voice yelled. "What about the old man?" "Don't worry about him." Victoria's voice floated up through the floorboards, shrill and drunk. "He's out of it. He'll be in a home within the month. Then we can really redo this place. The money is basically ours already." I lay there in the dark, listening to them toast my demise. They were celebrating their victory. They were drunk on greed and arrogance. They thought the game was over. They didn't know the game had just begun. I reached under the mattress and pulled out a small black notebook. I turned on a pen light, shielding the glow with my hand. I wrote down everything. The date, the time, the firing of Mrs. Higgins, the theft of the silver spoon, the cutting of the phone lines, the withholding of food, the celebration downstairs. Every insult, every lie, every stolen dollar. It was all going into the record. They were building their dream life, but they were laying the foundation on a landmine. And I was the one holding the detonator. "Sleep well, Children, I whispered to the darkness. Enjoy the party. Because the hangover is going to be fatal. The fog in my brain wasn't natural. I knew the aches of 70 years, the way rain settled in the knees, or how a name might slip just out of reach for a moment. But this was different. This was a lead weight pressing down on my frontal lobe, a suffocating gray blanket that wrapped around my consciousness the moment I opened my eyes. I was sleeping 18 hours a day. My hands, which had once signed federal warrants without a tremor, were now shaking so violently I couldn't hold a pen to do the crossword. Victoria sat on the edge of my bed, smoothing the duvet with a look of practiced concern that never quite reached her eyes. "Dad, you're getting worse," she would whisper, her voice dripping with a sickly sweetness. "You forgot to eat lunch again. You're staring at the wall. We're so worried. It's the grief, Dad. It's eating you alive." I hadn't forgotten lunch. I had skipped it because the soup smelled metallic, like copper pennies. But the constant gaslighting was eroding my defenses. Was I losing it? Was this the slide into darkness everyone feared? Then came the expert. It was a humid Tuesday afternoon. I was bundled in a blanket in the sunroom, fighting the crushing urge to close my eyes. Jared walked in, followed by a man I had never seen before. "Dad!" Jared boomed, his voice too loud for the small room. "This is Dr. Evans. He's a specialist. We called him for a house call, since getting you to the car has been such a struggle lately." I lifted my heavy head to examine this specialist. In 40 years on the bench, I learned to read a man by the details he forgets to hide. Dr. Evans wore a white coat, but it was ill-fitting, yellowed at the collar. He wouldn't meet my gaze. He looked at my chin, my shoulder, the window, never my eyes. But it was his shoes that condemned him. They were expensive loafers, but the leather was scuffed raw at the toes, and there was dried mud cake thick around the heels. A high-end geriatric specialist making house calls in Lake Forest does not walk through mud. He smelled of stale tobacco and nervous sweat. "Mr. Caldwell," Dr. Evans said, reaching for my wrist. His hands were clammy. "Let us check those vitals." The examination was a farce. He listened to my heart for 3 seconds through a thick wool sweater. He flashed a pen light across my face so fast he couldn't possibly have checked my pupil response. He asked nothing of my history, my diet, my pain. He stood up abruptly, turning to Victoria and Jared. "It is, as I suspected," he said, pulling a prescription pad from his pocket. "Rapid onset dementia, likely aggravated by the trauma of your wife's passing. It's aggressive. We need to manage the symptoms immediately to prevent violent outbursts." Violent outbursts. I was barely strong enough to lift my head. "Is there a cure?" Victoria asked, clasping her hands. "No cure," Evans said, shaking his head. "Just management. I'm prescribing a specialized sedative. It will keep him calm. It's a custom compound. Very effective. I brought the first month's supply so you don't have to wait." He reached into his battered bag and pulled out a plain orange bottle. No pharmacy label, no dosage instructions, just a bottle of small, bright blue pills. "This feels highly irregular, doctor," I rasped. "Where is the label?" Jared stepped between me and the doctor, pushing me gently back into the chair. "Don't agitate yourself, Harry. The doctor knows best. This is concierge medicine. Only the best for you." Evans fled the room as if the police were at the door. I heard them whispering in the hallway, money changing hands. When Jared returned, he held a glass of water and one of the blue pills. "Time for your medicine, Harry," he said. I looked at the pill. It was the color of antifreeze. My instinct screamed. This wasn't medicine. This was a sentence. If I took this, I would never wake up. Not really. I would be the zombie they claimed I was. But if I refused, they would force it. Or they would call the authorities and claim I was dangerous, using Evans's diagnosis to commit me. I took the pill with a shaking hand. I placed it on my tongue. I took a large gulp of water. "Good man," Jared said. I swallowed the water, but I slid the pill under my tongue, tucking it into the soft pocket of flesh. It was a trick I learned from a drug mule witness back in '95. It burned. "I feel tired," I mumbled. "It works fast," Jared said, checking his watch. "Go to sleep, old man." He left. I waited until his footsteps faded. I shuffled to the corner of the room where Catherine's favorite plant stood. A sansevieria, a snake plant, indestructible. "I'm sorry, Catherine," I whispered. I spat the dissolving blue pill into my handkerchief. I crushed it into a powder and mixed it with water from my glass. Then I poured the toxic slurry into the soil of the snake plant. If it was just a sedative, the plant would be fine. Maybe a little droopy. I spent the next 3 days playing the part. I flushed the pills. I slurred my speech. I let them talk about selling the house right in front of me. But my eyes were always on the plant. On the first day, the tips turned yellow. On the second day, the rigid stalks began to sag. By the morning of the third day, the plant was dead. It wasn't just dead, it was destroyed. The leaves had turned a slimy, necrotic black. They had collapsed into a rot that smelled of sulfur. The chemical had liquefied the cellular structure from the inside out. I stared at the black ruin. My hands stopped shaking. The fog was gone, replaced by a cold, diamond-hard clarity. They weren't just drugging me. They were killing me. Slowly. Organ failure. Dr. Evans would sign the death certificate. I looked at the black leaves. That was my liver. That was my kidneys. I heard footsteps. Victoria. I threw a newspaper over the plant and slumped in my chair, mouth open. "Dad, you okay?" she called from the doorway. I grunted. She wrinkled her nose. "Smells like something died in here." She left. I waited. Then I took a photo of the dead plant with my bonaphone. I bagged the soil and the dead leaves. This wasn't waste. This was evidence. This was attempted murder. The gavel was awake, and court was about to be in session. The first 24 hours without the blue pills were a descent into a private kind of hell. My body, deprived of the chemical leash it had been forced to wear, rebelled with a violence that terrified me. I lay in my bed, sweat soaking through the sheets, my muscles seizing in microscopic spasms that felt like electric shocks running just beneath the skin. My heart hammered a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs, a bird trapped in a cage. I wanted to scream. I wanted to claw at the walls. But I lay still. I forced my breathing to remain shallow and ragged, mimicking the decline they were so eager to see. Victoria came in to check on me around noon. She didn't bring food. She just stood at the foot of the bed, watching my trembling hands clutch the blanket. "He's fading fast," she whispered into her phone, turning slightly away from me. "The doctor said the progression would be rapid, but this is efficient." "Yes, I'll call the realtor today." She thought I was dying. She didn't realize that for the first time in weeks, I was actually waking up. The withdrawal was agony, yes, but through the pain, my senses were sharpening into focus. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator downstairs. I could smell the distinct, cloying scent of Victoria's perfume lingering in the hallway. My mind was coming back online, rebooting system by system, and it was hungry for justice. I waited until late afternoon for my window of opportunity. Jared had a routine. At 4 o'clock, after his exhausting day of spending my money and playing video games in my living room, he took a shower. A long, steamy shower. He liked to sing loudly, badly. As soon as I heard the plumbing groan and the off-key warbling begin, I threw off the covers. My legs were weak, but adrenaline is a powerful fuel. I grabbed the plastic baggie from my hiding spot inside the hollow bedpost. Inside was the soil sample, the dead leaves of the snake plant, and a handwritten note I had scrawled with a shaking hand during the night. The note contained names, dates, the chemical taste of the pills, and a directive. I moved to the window. It opened onto the side garden, obscured from the street by a high hedge. I climbed out. At 70, climbing out a window is not a graceful act. I scraped my shin, tore my pajama sleeve, and landed in the mulch with a heavy thud that knocked the wind out of me. I froze, listening. Jared was still singing. I crawled on my hands and knees toward the old oak tree at the back of the property. Catherine and I had planted it 40 years ago. It was our anchor. Now it would be my post office. I dug a hole at the base of the trunk using a silver spoon I had swiped from my dinner tray days ago. The earth was cool and damp. I placed the plastic bag in the hole. I covered it with dirt, patted it down, and scattered dead leaves over the spot to mask the disturbance. It looked natural, just another patch of ground in a neglected garden. I didn't go back to the window. I couldn't risk the climb. I slipped through the side door into the mudroom, moving like a ghost in my own home. I needed to send the signal. I made my way to the basement. The air down there was cool and smelled of dust and old paper. It was the smell of my archives, boxes of case files I had kept from my years on the bench. Victoria and Jared never came down here. It was too dark, too dirty for their tastes. They preferred the marble and light of the upper floors. I walked to the utility panel in the far corner. I pried open the metal casing. Taped to the inside was a Nokia brick phone, a relic from the early 2000s. I kept it charged. I kept it prepaid. Paranoia, Catherine used to call it. Preparation, I had corrected her. I turned it on. The battery was full. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice. Law office of Sarah Jenkins. A sharp, professional voice answered. I didn't identify myself. I didn't say hello. I spoke in a code we had established 2 decades ago when she was my clerk and we were dealing with threats from the cartel. The docket is full, Sarah, I rasped. We have a motion to dismiss on the grounds of toxicity. Evidence is filed at the Oak. The client is compromised. There was a pause, a silence that lasted 2 heartbeats. Then Sarah's voice changed. It lost its administrative polish and became steel. Understood, Your Honor. Is the client secure? Negative. Hostile environment. Immediate action required. I will draft the writ. Stay low. The line went dead. I turned off the phone and taped it back inside the panel. My hands were shaking again, but this time from exertion, not weakness. I had done it. The cavalry was coming. I turned to leave the basement, but I froze. The stairs creaked. Someone was opening the door at the top of the stairs. Light flooded down, blinding me in the gloom. Dad! Victoria's voice echoed down the stairwell, sharp and suspicious. What on earth are you doing down there? Panic fled in my chest. If she found the phone, if she realized I was mobile and coherent, the game was over. They would increase the dosage. They would restrain me. I slumped my shoulders. I let my jaw go slack. I turned slowly, shuffling my feet, looking not at her, but at a dark corner of the room. Hey, Kitty, Kitty, I mumbled, my voice trembling with a pathetic, confused hope. Whiskers, are you down here? Boy, come here, Whiskers. Daddy has some milk. Victoria sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. She walked down 2 steps, peering into the darkness. Dad, Whiskers died 5 years ago. You know that. I looked up at her, letting tears well in my eyes. No, no. I heard him. He's hungry. Catherine said he's hungry. Where is Catherine? She needs to feed the cat. Victoria shook her head, her face twisting in disgust. You're losing your mind, old man. Mom is dead. The cat is dead. There is nobody down here but you and the dust. Come upstairs before you fall and break a hip. I don't have time to take you to the ER today. She turned and walked back up, leaving the door open. I stood there for a moment, letting the mask fall. I wiped the tears from my eyes. Whiskers had been a good cat. He was serving me even from beyond the grave. I shuffled up the stairs, back to my prison, back to the blue pills I would hide in my cheek, and back to the waiting game. They thought I was chasing ghosts. They didn't know the ghost was hunting them. The hours between the dead drop at the oak tree and the middle of the night were an exercise in excruciating patience. I lay in my bed, listening to the house settle, my body screaming for the sedatives I had denied it. The tremors were worse now, a constant low-frequency vibration in my hands and legs that made the bed frame rattle if I didn't tense every muscle to control it. But I welcomed the pain. The pain was real. The pain was clarity. It was a constant reminder of why I was fighting. Around midnight, a new sound drifted up from the floorboards. It wasn't the boisterous partying of the previous night. It was the low, murmured arguing of conspirators who were starting to feel the pressure of their own timeline. I needed to know what they were saying. I needed to know the state of the battlefield. I forced myself up. My joints popped loud in the silence of the room. I froze, waiting for a reaction, but none came. I slipped on my wool socks, the same ones I used for my late-night patrols during the big mafia trials of the 90s when insomnia was my constant companion. I moved to the door and eased it open. The hallway was dark, save for a sliver of light coming from the kitchen downstairs. I didn't go to the stairs immediately. I moved down the hall to the guest room, the one they had claimed as their master suite. The door was open, the room empty. They were downstairs. This was my chance to see the physical evidence of their occupation. I slipped inside their room. It smelled of stale perfume and greed. My eyes adjusted to the gloom, and my heart sank. The room was a disaster zone of my possessions. On the dresser, Victoria had piled Catherine's jewelry boxes, not the costume jewelry, but the pieces I thought I had hidden well enough. I walked over, my steps silent on the carpet. I opened the top box. It was empty. Catherine's pearl necklace, the one I bought her for our 30th anniversary, was gone. I opened another. Her diamond tennis bracelet. Gone. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. I looked around the room. On the bedside table, next to a half-empty bottle of wine, was a stack of pink slips. Pawn shop receipts. I picked them up, my hand shaking with a rage so profound it almost blinded me. Fast cash pawn on 4th Street. They hadn't even taken them to an appraiser or an auction house where they might get fair value. They had pawned my dead wife's heirlooms for quick cash at a strip mall fence. The dates on the receipts were from 3 days ago, the day Dr. Evans arrived. They were liquidating the assets to pay for the poison. I memorized the address. I memorized the ticket numbers. I would get them back. I would burn down the pawn shop if I had to, but I would get them back. I put the receipts back exactly as I found them. I turned to leave, but something under the bed caught my eye. A heavy metal briefcase. It wasn't mine. It was Jared's. I knelt down, my knees protesting on the hard floor. The case was locked, a simple 3-digit tumbler. Jared was not a complex man. I tried the first combination that came to mind, 777. The slot machine jackpot. The latch clicked open. I lifted the lid. Inside, there were no papers. There was cash, stacks of it, rubber-banded rolls of $100 bills. It looked like $20,000, maybe $30,000. But next to the cash was something that made my blood run cold. It was a gun, a snub-nose .38 special. The serial number had been filed off. It was a throwaway piece, a boner gun, the kind used by low-level enforcers and desperate criminals. Why did my son-in-law, a failed real estate broker, have an unserialized weapon and $30,000 in cash under his bed? This wasn't just greed anymore. This was dangerous. This was the kind of trouble that didn't end with a lawsuit. It ended with a shallow grave. They weren't just stealing from me to live the high life. They were stealing from me to pay off. Who? I closed the case and scrambled the lock. I shoved it back under the bed. The narrative in my head shifted. I wasn't just fighting for my property. I was fighting for my life against people who were backed into a corner by wolves. I left the room and crept to the top of the stairs. The voices from the kitchen were clearer now. "He has to go this week," Jared was saying, his voice tight with stress. Rocco called again. He said the interest compounds daily. We need the house sale to clear before the end of the month, or they start breaking fingers. "It's not that simple, Jared," Victoria hissed back. "The power of attorney has a waiting period, unless Dr. Evans declares him incapacitated immediately." "Then call Evans," Jared snapped. "Tell him to up the dose. Make him a vegetable if you have to. I'm not losing my kneecaps because your dad is taking too long to die." I gripped the banister. My knuckles turned white. They were accelerating the timeline. Rocco. That was the name. A loan shark. Jared was in deep with a loan shark, and I was his collateral. Suddenly, I heard the scrape of a chair against the kitchen floor. Footsteps approaching the stairs. "I'm going up to check on him," Victoria said. "I want to make sure he actually swallowed the pill tonight." I was exposed. I was 10 feet from my room, but the floorboard in front of my door groaned like a dying animal if you stepped on it wrong. I couldn't make it back in time without making noise. I looked around frantically. The linen closet was 2 feet away. I pulled the door open and squeezed inside, pulling it shut just as Victoria's shadow fell across the top of the stairs. I held my breath. The closet smelled of lavender sachets and mothballs. I pressed myself against the shelves of towels, praying my tremors wouldn't make the door rattle. Victoria walked past the closet. I could hear the swish of her silk robe. She stopped at my bedroom door. She opened it. Silence. She was looking at my empty bed. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. If she turned on the light, if she saw the bed was empty, the alarm would be raised. They would hunt me down. They would realize I was mobile. "Dad," she whispered into the dark room. I didn't answer. I bit my tongue to keep from coughing. She stepped into the room. I heard the bathroom door open. "Dad, are you in there?" She was moving deeper into the room. This was my chance. I eased the closet door open. I slipped out into the hallway. I didn't run. Running makes noise. I flowed. I moved with the muscle memory of a man who used to sneak into the nursery to check on his sleeping daughter without waking her. I reached the threshold of my room just as she was coming out of the bathroom. I leaned heavily against the doorframe, letting my body sag, my eyes drooping half shut. "Victoria," I mumbled, slurring the words. "Is it morning?" She jumped, spinning around. She put her hand to her chest. "Jesus, Dad, you scared me. Where were you?" I blinked slowly, looking confused. "Water. Thirsty. Kitchen is too far. Got lost." She let out a breath of relief, but her eyes were still suspicious. "You were downstairs." "No," I lied, pointing vaguely down the hall. "Bathroom. Wrong door. Dark." She stared at me for a long moment, analyzing my posture, my face. I let a little drool escape the corner of my mouth. I let my hand shake violently against the doorframe. She bought it. The contempt in her eyes returned, replacing the suspicion. "You're wondering," she said, disgusted. "Go back to bed. I'll get you water. Do not leave this room again." I shuffled back to the bed and climbed in. She watched me, her arms crossed. "You're a mess, Dad," she whispered. "A total mess." She left, closing the door firmly. I heard the lock click from the outside. She had locked me in. I lay in the dark, my heart rate slowly returning to normal. They had locked the door. That complicated things. But they had forgotten one thing. This was my house. I built it. I knew its secrets. The bedroom door had a lock, yes, but the hinges were on the asterisk inside asterisk, and I had a multi-tool in the pocket of my suit jacket hanging in the closet. I waited 10 minutes until I heard them go into the guest room and the door closed. Then I got up. I didn't go for the water. I went for the closet. I retrieved the multi-tool. It took me 3 minutes to pop the hinge pins. I lifted the door out of the frame, setting it gently against the wall. I was free again. But now I had new information. Pawn shop receipts. A gun. A loan shark named Rocco. And a deadline. They were desperate. Desperate people make mistakes, but desperate people are also dangerous. I needed to secure the financial evidence tonight. I needed to hack the laptop. I looked at the open doorway. The hallway was clear. The house was silent again. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the pain in my joints. The investigation wasn't over. I had to go back into the belly of the beast. I had to get to the study. I moved into the hall, stepping over the threshold where the door used to be. I was a ghost in my own life, haunting the people who tried to kill me. And ghosts, as they would soon learn, are very hard to catch. I reached the door to my study. It was closed, but not locked. Jared was arrogant. He thought I was a drooling invalid, incapable of turning a doorknob, let alone navigating a complex financial investigation. I pushed the door open. The smell hit me first. It was the scent of disrespect. Stale pepperoni pizza, cheap beer, and that cloying body spray Jared insisted on marinating in. My study, once a place of law and order, a place where I had written opinions that changed federal precedents, now smelled like a fraternity house basement. I walked to my desk. My beautiful, hand-carved mahogany desk was cluttered with his garbage, empty cans, a half-eaten sandwich, and there, sitting in the center like a throne, was my laptop. I opened the lid. The screen flared to life, casting a ghostly blue light across the room. I squinted against the brightness. It asked for a password. I didn't need to hack it. I didn't need a decryption key. I knew my enemy. Jared was a simple man with simple vanities. I typed in the 6 digits I knew would be there, 0-4-1-2-8-3. Victoria's birthday. Access granted. I didn't smile. There was no joy in being right about their stupidity. I navigated immediately to the browser. He hadn't even logged out of the bank portal. The Caldwell Family Trust dashboard was open. I looked at the balance. It was significantly lower than it had been a month ago. I clicked on the transaction history. My eyes scanned the lines, looking for the bleed. It didn't take long to find the hemorrhage. There were a series of transfers, all labeled with vague, professional-sounding codes: medical consulting fees, geriatric care management, lifestyle audit services. The recipient for all of them was a company called JN5 Consulting LLC. Jared and Victoria. They weren't even trying to hide it. They had set up a shell company and were funneling my life savings into it, pretending they were paying for my care. I clicked on the most recent transfer, dated just yesterday. $450,000. Nearly $500,000 siphoned out in a single keystroke. That wasn't just theft. That was grand larceny. That was wire fraud. That was a federal crime, carrying a sentence of up to 20 years. I took a deep breath, steadying my hand. I needed more. I minimized the browser and opened his email client. The inbox was a disaster of spam and gaming newsletters. But one subject line caught my eye. It was from a man named Fast Eddie. I knew Fast Eddie. He was a real estate broker who had lost his license twice for unethical practices. The subject line read, "Urgent sale Lake Forest property." I opened the thread. My blood ran cold as I read Jared's words. "Eddie, we need to move this fast. The old man is deteriorating quicker than we thought. We need the cash to finalize the LLC investments. Listed for $3.8 million. My house. This estate was appraised at $4.5 million just last year. They were willing to lose $700,000 just to dump the asset quickly. They wanted the cash liquid before I died, or before anyone asked questions." I read Eddie's reply. 3.8 is a steal. I can have a buyer in 24 hours at that price. But what about the resident? We can't do showings with a senile old man wandering around in his pajamas. Jared's response was, "The smoking gun." It was the sentence that would seal his fate. "Don't worry about the resident. He is going to Sunny Meadows next week. We are finalizing the paperwork for the involuntary commitment tomorrow. He won't be a problem by the time you bring the buyers." Sunny Meadows. It wasn't a retirement community. It was a state-funded warehouse for the indigent and the forgotten. It was a place where people went to rot in urine-soaked sheets. They had stolen nearly $500,000 of my money, sold my car, and were selling my home for pennies on the dollar. Yet, they were planning to dump me in the cheapest, filthiest hole they could find to save a few grand a month on my care. The cruelty was absolute. It was efficient. It was sociopathic. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a micro USB drive. It was small, silver, and unassuming. I plugged it into the side of the laptop. My hand hovered over the trackpad. I selected everything. The bank statements, the transfer receipts to JN5 Consulting, the email thread with Fast Eddie, the draft of the guardianship application they were planning to file. I dragged the files to the external drive. The progress bar appeared. A green line slowly filling up. Copying items. Time remaining. 30 seconds. It felt like 30 years. I stood in the blue glow, my ears straining for any sound from the hallway. If Jared woke up for a glass of water, if Victoria got up to use the bathroom, if they caught me here, standing tall, operating a computer, saving evidence, the charade would be over. They would realize I wasn't senile. And then they would get desperate. Dr. Evans would come back with a stronger dose. Oh, a pillow. 10 seconds. The floorboard in the hallway creaked. I froze. The sound was unmistakable. Someone was moving. 5 seconds. I heard the rustle of fabric. A cough. Jared. 0 seconds. Complete. I yanked the USB drive out. I closed the laptop lid, wiping the surface with my sleeve to remove my fingerprints. I didn't have time to arrange the pizza boxes back exactly how they were. I just had to hope he was too hungover to notice. I moved to the door, pressing my ear against the wood. The footsteps were heavy, clumsy. They were moving toward the bathroom, not the study. The toilet flushed. The water ran for a second. Then the heavy footsteps returned to the bedroom. The bed springs groaned. The snoring resumed. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I slipped out of the study and glided back to my room. I went into my private bathroom. It was the only place I had left that felt somewhat secure, mostly because Victoria refused to enter it, claiming it smelled like old people. I lifted the heavy porcelain lid of the toilet tank. It was heavy, cool to the touch. I took a piece of waterproof duct tape from my pocket. I taped the tiny silver USB drive to the underside of the lid, high up where the water wouldn't touch it. I lowered the lid carefully, ensuring it made no sound as it settled back onto the ceramic tank. It was done. I had the poison. I had the financial trail. I had the intent to sell. I had the conspiracy to commit. I looked at myself in the mirror above the sink. My reflection was gaunt. My hair was wild. I looked like a madman. But the eyes staring back were cold and hard. They wanted to put me in Sunny Meadows next week. They wanted to sell my sanctuary for a quick payout. They wanted to erase Harrison Caldwell. I walked back to my bed and climbed in. I pulled the covers up to my chin. I stared at the ceiling, waiting for the sun to rise. I wouldn't sleep tonight. I didn't need sleep. I needed to rehearse. Tomorrow they would bring the papers. Tomorrow they would try to trick me into signing away my life. I closed my eyes and smiled in the dark. Let them come. I had a surprise for them. The trap was set. The evidence was secure, and the judge was ready to deliver his verdict. They thought they were the predators. They had no idea they were locked in a cage with a lion. The morning sun filtered through the heavy curtains of the master bedroom, casting long, dust-mote-filled beams across the floor. It should have been a beautiful day. The kind Catherine and I would have spent drinking coffee on the patio, watching the cardinals nest in the oak tree. Instead, the air in the room felt stagnant and heavy, charged with a predatory anticipation. I sat in my wheelchair by the window, a prop they had insisted on buying from a second-hand medical supply store to further their narrative of my rapid decline. I didn't need it, but I sat in it, letting my head loll to the side, my mouth slightly open, waiting for the performance to begin. At 9 sharp, the door opened. Victoria walked in. She wasn't wearing her usual loungewear. She was dressed in a sharp business suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked like she was going to a board meeting, or perhaps a hostile takeover. In her hand, she carried a thick manila envelope and a black fountain pen. Jared hovered in the doorway behind her, his arms crossed, his eyes darting around the room as if checking for invisible witnesses. "Good morning, Dad," Victoria said, her voice bright, too loud, the way one speaks to a child or a simpleton. "We have some good news. I found a new insurance plan for you. Better coverage, better doctors. We just need to get the paperwork out of the way so we can enroll you today." She placed the stack of papers on the small table in front of me. I looked down at them through half-closed eyelids. The top page was indeed a generic medical history form, something innocuous. But the edges of the papers underneath were slightly misaligned. I saw the bold, capitalized font peeking out from the second page. Durable power of attorney, revocation of prior directives, asset control authorization. These weren't insurance forms. This was a complete surrender of my legal existence. If I signed these, Victoria would have the power to sell my house, liquidate my investments, empty my bank accounts, and make medical decisions on my behalf, including the decision to cease care. It was a death warrant disguised as bureaucracy. "I need a pen," I mumbled, my words slurring together. "Here, Dad, use this one." Victoria uncapped the fountain pen and pressed it into my right hand. My hand trembled. It wasn't entirely an act. The residue of the sedatives and the stress of the last few days had taken a toll, but I exaggerated the tremors, letting the pen wobble violently between my fingers. I lowered the nib to the paper. "Just sign right there at the bottom," Victoria urged, tapping a manicured fingernail on the signature line. I tried. I really did. I dragged the pen across the paper, creating a jagged, ink-blotted line that looked nothing like a signature. It looked like a seismograph reading of an earthquake. I let the pen slip from my fingers. It clattered onto the table, rolling across the document and leaving a smear of black ink. "Oops," I whispered. "Dropped it." Victoria sighed, a sharp intake of breath through her nose. She picked up the pen and wiped the ink off the page with her thumb. "It's okay, Dad. Just try again. Focus. Hold it tight." She jammed the pen back into my hand. This time, she wrapped her fingers around mine, squeezing hard. Her skin was cold. Her grip was painful, her nails digging into the thin skin of my knuckles. "I'll help you," she said, her voice tight. "We'll do it together." She began to force my hand to move. She was trying to guide me to right Harrison Caldwell. This was it, the moment of truth. If I let her guide my hand, a forensic handwriting expert might later argue that I had assistance, but they could also argue that the intent was there. I couldn't let a legible signature appear on this document. I decided to escalate the chaos. I felt a tickle in my throat, summoned from the depths of my lungs. I coughed, a dry, hacking cough, then another. I convulsed in the chair, jerking my arm back violently. The pen tore through the paper, a long, ugly rip right through the signature line of the power of a tiny document. I dropped the pen again, hacking and wheezing, doubling over as if I couldn't breathe. "Oh, for God's sake!" Jared shouted from the doorway. "He ruined it!" Victoria stared at the torn paper. Her face went red. The mask of the caring daughter dissolved completely, revealing the monster underneath. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't get me water. She slammed her hand down on the table, making the lamp rattle. "You useless old man!" she screamed. The silence that followed was deafening. I stopped coughing. I looked up at her, letting fear show in my eyes, though what I felt was a cold, burning satisfaction. She had said it. She had finally said what she had been thinking since the funeral. Victoria grabbed my shoulders and shook me. "Sign it. Just sign the damn paper so we can be done with this. Sign it and die already so we can move on with our lives. Do you have any idea how exhausting this is, waiting for you? Just let go." There it was. The truth. Naked and ugly. Jared stepped into the room. "Vic, calm down. He's looking at you." "I don't care," she spat, turning to grab a fresh copy of the document from her briefcase. She had come prepared. She knew I might mess up the first one. She slapped the new document down on the table. "Sign it," she hissed, leaning into my face. "Also help me God. I will have Dr. Evans double the dose. I will have him put you in a coma, and I will guide your hand while you are unconscious. Do you understand me?" I shrank back into the wheelchair, making myself as small as possible. I needed to sign. If I didn't, they would follow through on the threat. They would overdose me. I needed to survive to fight them in court, but I couldn't give them a valid signature. I reached for the pen, but this time, I didn't reach with my right hand. I reached with my left. "What are you doing?" Jared asked. "Use your right hand." "Hurt." I whimpered, clutching my right wrist where Victoria had dug her nails in. "It hurts. Can't hold." Victoria looked at my right hand. There were red crescents where her nails had pierced the skin. A small drop of blood was forming. She flinched, perhaps realizing she had left physical evidence of abuse. "Fine," she snapped. "Use the left. Just make a mark. Anything." I took the pen, controlling my left hand. I am not ambidextrous. I have never written with my left hand in my life. The grip was awkward, foreign. I lowered the nib to the paper. I wrote H. Caldwell. It was shaky. It was slanted the wrong way. The pressure points were all wrong. The loops were jagged. It looked like the writing of a child, or a very sick man. But more importantly to the eyes of the law and forensic science, it was a signature made under extreme duress with a non-dominant hand, which fundamentally alters the biometric rhythm of the writing. I knew because I had presided over a case in 1998 where a will was invalidated for this exact reason. A signature that deviates more than 40% from the baseline motor control of the subject is flagged as suspicious. By signing with my left hand, I was practically stamping the document with the word fraud in invisible ink. "There," I whispered, dropping the pen. "Done." Victoria snatched the paper up before the ink was even dry. She scrutinized it. It was ugly, but it was legible enough for a bank teller who didn't care to look too closely. "Finally," she muttered. She didn't say thank you. She didn't apologize for the screaming or the shaking. She stuffed the papers into her envelope. "Get him cleaned up," she said to Jared, gesturing vaguely at me. "He looks pathetic." She marched out of the room, the heels of her shoes striking the floor with the rhythm of a victory march. She thought she had just won the keys to the kingdom. She thought she now owned me, my house, and my fortune. Jared looked at me with a mixture of disgust and pity. He shook his head. You really made that harder than it needed to be, Harry. We're just trying to help you. He didn't help me up. He didn't check my bleeding hand. He turned and followed his wife, closing the door behind him. I sat alone in the wheelchair, listening to their footsteps fade down the hallway. I heard them high-five. I heard the pop of a champagne cork again. They were celebrating my erasure. I looked down at my right hand. The blood from where Victoria's nails had broken the skin was smearing onto my trousers. I didn't wipe it off. I needed that. I needed the wound to scab over. I needed the physical proof of the coercion. I stood up from the wheelchair. My legs were stronger today. The detox was working. I walked to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. They had the paper, but that paper was a trap. When I stood in court and showed the judge that signature, when I showed him the difference between my right-hand script and that left-handed scroll, and when I combined that with the testimony of my bloody hand and the audio recording of Victoria screaming at me to die, that document wouldn't just be void. It would be the primary exhibit in a felony extortion trial. I walked back to the window and looked out at the oak tree. The evidence was safe. Sarah knew the plan. The trap was sprung. Now all I had to do was wait for them to make their move. They would try to move me soon. They wouldn't want me in the house when they started liquidating the assets. They would try to dump me, and that would be the moment I disappeared, only to reappear as their worst nightmare. I climbed back into bed, pulling the sheets up to my chin. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I replayed the scene in my mind, memorizing every word, every gesture, every second of their cruelty. I was building the file in my head, page by page, and it was going to be a masterpiece. They came for me at dawn, just as the sky was turning a bruised purple over the lake. I was awake, of course. I hadn't slept since I signed the papers with my left hand. I was waiting for the final betrayal, and it arrived in the form of two men who looked less like medical professionals and more like bouncers at a dive bar. They didn't knock. They didn't introduce themselves. They simply barged into my room, filling the space with the smell of stale coffee and aggression. One of them, a man with a neck as thick as a tree trunk, grabbed my arm. "Mr. Caldwell, time to go," he grunted. I didn't resist. I let my body go limp, playing the part of a confused geriatric to the bitter end. "Where?" I mumbled, looking around wildly. "Where is Catherine?" Victoria appeared in the doorway. She was wearing sunglasses even though the sun hadn't fully risen. She couldn't look me in the eye. She looked at her shoes, at the wall, at the heavy grip the orderly had on my bicep. "It's for the best, Dad," she said, her voice tight and brittle. "We found a place that can give you the care we can't. Professionals. It's beautiful. You'll love it." Liar. They marched me out of the house I had built, past the garden where I had buried the evidence, and shoved me into the back of an unmarked white van. There were no windows in the back, just a metal cage separating me from the driver. It wasn't a medical transport. It was a prisoner transfer. We drove for an hour. I felt the smooth pavement of the highway give way to the potholed, neglected roads of the industrial outskirts. We weren't going to the Golden Horizon facility she had shown me brochures for, the one with the lake views and the organic chef. We were heading to the places people go when they have been erased. When the doors opened, the smell hit me first. It was a physical blow. Urine, boiled cabbage, and bleach trying desperately to cover up the scent of decay. I looked up at the sign above the peeling paint of the entrance. Sunny Meadows. The name was a cruel joke. The building was a concrete block with barred windows, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. It looked like a minimum security prison for the forgotten. The orderlies dragged me inside. The lobby was dim, lit by flickering fluorescent tubes that buzzed like trapped insects. The floor was sticky. In the corner, an old woman in a wheelchair was staring at a blank television screen, rocking back and forth, muttering to herself. No one was attending to her. They brought me to the intake desk. A woman behind the glass, looking bored and tired, barely glanced up. "Name?" she asked, popping a bubble of gum. "Harrison Caldwell," the orderly said, tossing a manila envelope onto the counter. "Standard admit. Payment secured for the first month. Cash." I listened closely. Cash. That meant no paper trail. No bank transfer linking this hellhole to my accounts. Room 304, the woman said, handing him a key. It's a double. He's bunking with Mr. Henderson. Tell him not to mind the screaming at night. Henderson has night terrors. They dragged me down a hallway that seemed to stretch into infinity. The rooms were cells. 2 beds, a sink, a toilet with no seat. They shoved me into room 304. My roommate was a skeletal figure, curled into a fetal position on a mattress that was thinner than a yoga mat. The big orderly pushed me onto the empty bed. You stay here, Pops. Lunch is at noon. Don't cause trouble, or we sedate you. They left, locking the door from the outside. I sat on the mattress. It crunched. Plastic. They had put plastic covers on the mattress to make it easier to hose down. I looked around the room. There was mold growing in the corner of the ceiling. The window was caked with grime so thick I couldn't see outside. This was it. This was their plan. They had stolen my car, my money, my home, and now my freedom. And the cost? I saw a flyer taped to the back of the door, monthly rates starting at $800. $800. I did the math in my head, a cold fury rising in my chest. They had just cleared nearly $500,000 from my trust. They were about to sell my house for almost $4 million. And they had dumped me in a place that cost less than their monthly car payment. They weren't just greedy. They were cheap. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted to maximize the profit margin on my disposal. They valued my life, my comfort, my dignity at $800 a month. I sat there for 2 hours. I listened to Mr. Henderson moan in his sleep. I watched a cockroach scuttle across the floor. I felt the weight of the injustice pressing down on me, turning the carbon of my anger into a diamond of resolve. Then I checked my watch. It was 10 a.m. If my calculations were correct, Victoria and Jared were currently at brunch, toasting to their new freedom. They thought I was processed, locked away, and silenced. They had likely thrown away my phone, assuming I was too senile to know how to use it anyway. But they forgot one thing. I was the gavel, and I never went into a high-stakes situation without backup. At 10:15 a.m., the front doors of Sunny Meadows burst open. I heard it from my room down the hall. A commotion. Voices raised. Not the usual shouts of the residents, but a sharp, authoritative voice that cut through the stagnant air like a knife. I demand to see the director immediately. It was Sarah. I stood up. I walked to the door and pressed my ear against it. You cannot just barge in here, the receptionist squeaked. I am a partner at Jenkins & Associates. Sarah's voice boomed, echoing off the linoleum. I have a writ of habeas corpus issued by the Federal Court of the Northern District of Illinois, signed by Judge Anderson himself not 20 minutes ago. You are holding a United States citizen against his will without valid medical course and based on fraudulent power of attorney documents. If you do not open door 304 in the next 30 seconds, I will have this entire facility shut down for health code violations, elder abuse, and kidnapping before you can finish popping that gum. Do you understand me? There was a silence, then the frantic jingle of keys. Footsteps hurried down the hall. Not the heavy plodding of the orderlies, but the sharp, rapid click of expensive heels. The lock turned. The door swung open. Sarah stood there. She was a vision of legal vengeance. She wore a tailored black suit that cost more than this entire building. She held a leather briefcase in one hand and a court order in the other. Behind her, the facility director, a sweating man in a cheap tie, looked like he was about to vomit. Mr. Caldwell, Sarah said, her voice softening just a fraction as she looked at me. Are you ready to check out? I straightened my spine. I brushed a speck of dust from my pajama sleeve. I looked at the director. I'll be expecting a full refund of the $800, I said calmly. And I suggest you get a lawyer. A good one. We walked out of Sunny Meadows without looking back. Sarah's car, a black S-Class Mercedes, was idling at the curb. The driver opened the door for me. The leather seats were soft, smelling of new car and safety. As soon as the door closed, shielding us from the stench of the facility, Sarah handed me a bag. I took the liberty of stopping at your tailor, she said, and I brought your shaving kit. I didn't waste time. While we drove back toward the city, toward the courthouse, I transformed. I used the vanity mirror and the electric razor to shave off the grey stubble of a senile old man. I wiped the grime from my face with a hot towel from the car's cooler. I stripped off the humiliating pajamas Victoria had dressed me in and put on the charcoal three-piece suit Sarah had brought. It was my armor. The fabric was familiar, empowering. I tied my tie, a Windsor knot, perfect and tight. I put on my gold cufflinks. I slid my watch onto my wrist. I looked at my reflection in the glass. The old man who shuffled and mumbled was gone. In his place sat Harrison Caldwell. Sarah watched me, a small, fierce smile playing on her lips. "We have a toxicology report from the FBI lab," she said. "Arsenic. Low dose, mixed with benzodiazepines. Enough to mimic dementia. Enough to kill you in a month." "And the bank records?" I asked, adjusting my cuffs. "Secured. The transfers to the shell company are traced. The sale listing for the house is preserved. We have them, Harry, dead to rights." I looked out the window. The skyline of Chicago was rising before us, gleaming in the sun. Somewhere in that city, my daughter and her husband were laughing, spending money that wasn't theirs, thinking they had one. They had no idea that the storm was coming. I turned to Sarah. The time for gathering evidence was over. The time for mercy had passed 3 months ago when they sold my car. I checked my watch. We had a hearing at 1 o'clock. "Step on it," I said to the driver. Then I looked at Sarah, and for the first time in months, I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who has just spotted its prey in the open. "It's time to hunt, Sarah. Let's go to court." The oak doors of courtroom 3B were heavy, solid wood that had absorbed the echoes of 1,000 lies and 1,000 verdicts. I stood outside them for a moment, adjusting my cufflinks, feeling the cool, familiar weight of the courthouse air. It smelled of floor wax, old paper, and the distinct metallic tang of anxiety. To most people, this smell induced fear. To me, it smelled like home. Sarah stood beside me, her hand resting lightly on the brass handle. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She knew the play. She pushed the doors open, and we stepped into the arena. The scene inside was a masterpiece of staged grief. Victoria and Jared were sitting at the plaintiff's table, dressed in somber, expensive black. Victoria was dabbing at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, her shoulders shaking with a performance of sorrow that would have been moving if I hadn't known she was checking her stock portfolio on her watch 5 minutes ago. Jared sat beside her, his head bowed, playing the part of a stoic, burdened son-in-law, the man forced to make the hard choice for the family's own good. Their lawyer, a slick man named Mr. Sterling, with a suit that cost more than my first car, was standing before the bench, his voice dropping to a theatrical hush. "Your Honor," he intoned, gesturing vaguely to the empty seat where I was supposed to be. "This is not a petition we bring lightly." Mr. Caldwell was a titan of the community, a man of immense respect. To see him reduced to this state, to a man who attacks his own caregivers, who wanders the streets confused, who cannot even feed himself, it is a tragedy. But for his own safety, and to preserve the remains of his estate from his own chaotic impulses, we must ask for immediate and total emergency guardianship. We have the medical reports from Dr. Evans citing rapid cognitive collapse. We have the incident reports. We have no choice. Judge Anderson sat behind the high bench, looking over his spectacles. I knew Anderson. 20 years ago, he was a young prosecutor who had been framed for evidence tampering by a corrupt police chief. I was the judge who saw the inconsistencies. I was the one who subpoenaed the hidden tapes that cleared his name and saved his career. He was a good man, a fair man, but he looked tired. He was nodding slowly, buying the narrative Sterling was selling, because he had no reason not to. He hadn't seen Harrison Caldwell in 10 years. He expected to see a ghost. And then I stepped into the aisle. The sound of my shoes on the marble floor was sharp and rhythmic. Click, click, click. It wasn't the shuffle of a slippered invalid. It was the march of a soldier returning to the front lines. The sound cut through Sterling's monologue. Heads turned. The court reporter stopped typing. The bailiff, who had been leaning against the wall, looking bored, straightened up, his eyes widening. I walked down the center aisle, my back straight, my chin held high. I wasn't using a cane. I wasn't wearing the stained pajamas they had sent me away in. I was wearing my charcoal three-piece suit, the one I had worn to my own retirement ceremony. I looked impeccable. I looked dangerous. Victoria turned in her seat. When she saw me, her initial reaction wasn't fair. It was amusement. She was so deep in her delusions, so convinced of her own victory, that she couldn't process the reality in front of her. She giggled. It was that same cruel, dismissive sound that had haunted me for months. She leaned over to Jared, whispering loud enough to carry in the sudden silence. "Look at him. He looks like a lost child playing dress-up. I bet he thinks we're taking him to a buffet. He probably doesn't even know where he is." Jared didn't look at me. He shook his head, a smile playing on his lips, turning his gaze away as if looking at me was beneath him. He was already spending the money in his head. He was already redesigning the kitchen. But Judge Anderson wasn't looking at them. He was looking at me. As I passed the bar and stepped into the well of the court, Anderson's face went pale. The blood drained from his cheek so fast I thought he might faint. His hand, reaching for his water glass, began to tremble. He took off his glasses, rubbed his eyes, and looked again. He knew that walk. He knew that suit. He knew the man who had taught him that the law is a shield, not a sword. The silence in the room became heavy, suffocating. It pressed against the eardrums. Judge Anderson leaned into his microphone. His voice was barely a whisper, but it boomed through the speakers like a thunderclap. "My God, is that really him?" Victoria stopped smiling. She looked at the judge, confused by his reaction. She didn't understand. She thought I was just her senile father. She didn't know I was legend in this building. She didn't know that the man sitting on the bench considered me his mentor, his savior. I didn't stop at the defendant's table. I walked right past Mr. Sterling, who stumbled back as if he had been physically pushed by the force of my presence. I walked until I was standing directly in front of the bench, eye to eye with the man who held the power to destroy me or save me. I looked at Anderson. I gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. A signal. Asterisk, I am here. I am awake. And I am angry. Asterisk. Then I turned slowly to face the courtroom. I looked at Victoria. Her smile was gone now, replaced by a flicker of unease. She was starting to realize that the script had changed. I looked at Jared, who was finally looking up from his phone. His mouth slightly open, a line of sweat appearing on his forehead. I didn't sit down. I didn't wait for a lawyer to speak for me. Sarah sat quietly at the counsel table, opening her briefcase, ready to hand me the ammunition, but I was the one pulling the trigger. I turned back to the judge. I placed my hands on the podium. They were steady, rock steady. "Your Honor," I said, my voice deep and resonant. The voice that had sentenced men to life without parole. The voice that had been silent for 3 months of hell. I apologize for the interruption. My daughter and her husband seemed to be laboring under a significant misapprehension regarding my mental faculties. They believe they are here to collect a guardianship over a helpless old man. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I turned my head slightly, catching Victoria's eye. She looked terrified. "But I am not here to defend my competency, Judge Anderson. I am here to act as a prosecutor. I am appearing pro se, and I am not asking for a dismissal." I took a breath, filling my lungs with the air of the courtroom, the air of justice. "Your Honor, I demand that the docket be amended immediately. I am filing a cross-petition. I request that this court try the petitioners, Victoria Caldwell and Jared Miller, on charges of grand larceny, elder abuse, fraud, and attempted murder. And I have the evidence to prove it right here, right now." The courtroom erupted. Mr. Sterling dropped his papers. Jared stood up, knocking his chair over. Victoria let out a strangled gasp. Judge Anderson banged his gavel, not to silence me, but to silence them. "Order!" Anderson roared, his eyes blazing with a fury I hadn't seen in 20 years. "Order in this court. Mr. Caldwell, you may proceed." I smiled. It was a cold, terrible smile. The trap was sprung. The lion was out of the cage, and it was feeding time. The gavel's bang was still echoing in the high ceiling of the courtroom as I turned my gaze to the gallery. The silence was absolute, a vacuum created by the sudden shift in power. Victoria was gripping the edge of the table, so hard her knuckles were white. Jared was staring at his shoes, perhaps realizing for the first time that his internet schemes and street smarts were useless in a federal court setting. I didn't look at them. I looked past them, to the third row where a sweating man in an ill-fitting suit was trying to make himself invisible. I called Dr. Reginald Evans to the stand, I announced, my voice filling the room without the need for a microphone. Evans froze. He looked to Jared for help, but Jared was busy pretending he didn't exist. The bailiff, a burly man who had worked my courtroom for years, moved toward the aisle. Evans stood up shakily, his knees knocking together. He walked to the witness stand like a man walking to the gallows. He was sworn in. He sat down. He wiped his forehead with a handkerchief that was already damp. "Mr. Caldwell," Judge Anderson said, nodding to me. "Your witness." I didn't go to the podium. I walked right up to the witness box, encroaching on his personal space, looming over him. I let the silence stretch, letting him stew in his own anxiety. "State your name and occupation for the record," I said. "Reginald Evans," he squeaked. I am a geriatric specialist. A neurologist." "A neurologist," I repeated, savoring the word. "Impressive. Tell me, Dr. Mr. Evans, in your expert opinion, what was the primary indicator of my rapid cognitive decline?" Evans licked his lips. His eyes darted around the room. "Well, Mr. Caldwell, it was the confusion, the disorientation, the tremors. Classic signs of advanced degeneration." "I see. And scientifically speaking, which part of the brain was affected? Was it the frontal lobe? The hippocampus?" "It was, yes, both. Generalized atrophy. Very sad." I leaned in closer. "And did you observe any issues with my Wernicke's area?" Evans blinked. "Excuse me. My Wernicke's area, doctor. Surely a neurologist knows what that is. Did you observe aphasia? Did you check for the Babinski sign?" Evans was sweating profusely now. Sweat was dripping down his nose. "Well, of course. The Babinski was very positive. Very bad." I smiled. It was a wolf smile. "That is fascinating, doctor, because the Babinski sign is a reflex in the foot. You never asked me to take off my shoes. And Wernicke's area controls language comprehension. If mine was damaged, I wouldn't be able to understand your lies right now." A ripple of murmurs went through the courtroom. Evans turned pale. "I meant it was a preliminary diagnosis," he stammered. "Preliminary." I scoffed. "You prescribed medication, potent medication, based on a glance at my shoes and a check of my pulse through a wool sweater." I walked back to the counsel table where Sarah was waiting. She handed me a plastic evidence bag. Inside was the orange bottle Evans had given me. "Do you recognize this, doctor?" Evans stared at the bottle as if it were a live cobra. "Yes, that is the medication I prescribed. A sedative to help you sleep, to calm the agitation." "A custom compound you called it," I said, holding the bottle up for the judge to see. "Concierge medicine." "Yes, just a mild relaxant standard for your condition." I turned to Sarah again. She handed me a thick document with the seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation stamped on the cover. I felt a surge of gratitude for my old friends at the Bureau who hadn't forgotten the favors I did them in the 90s. "I have here a toxicology report from the FBI Forensic Laboratory in Quantico," I said, my voice rising. "I sent them a sample of these pills 3 weeks ago, along with a sample of the soil from a snake plant that died 3 days after I watered it with this solution." Victoria let out a small, strangled gasp. I ignored her. "Would you like to know what is in your mild relaxant, Dr. Evans?" Dr. Evans didn't answer. He was shaking his head, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "It contains ketamine." I read from the report. "A horse tranquilizer in doses high enough to knock out a thoroughbred." But that is not the worst part. I slammed the report down on the railing of the witness box. "It also contains arsenic." The word hung in the air. The courtroom erupted. People gasped. A woman in the back row screamed. Judge Anderson slammed his gavel, his face a mask of fury. "Order! Order!" I leaned into Evans's face. "Arsenic, doctor. A heavy metal poison. Low dose. Just enough to cause tremors, confusion, organ failure. Just enough to mimic the symptoms of the dementia you diagnosed. You weren't treating me. You were murdering me. No. Evans shrieked, standing up. No, it wasn't supposed to kill you. Just make you sick. Just make you pliable. So you admit it. I roared. You admit you poisoned me. They told me to. Evans pointed a shaking finger at Jared and Victoria. He was hysterical now, tears streaming down his face. They said he was difficult. They said he needed to be managed until the papers were signed. I didn't know about the arsenic. I just mixed what Jared gave me. Jared jumped up. He's lying. He's a crazy old quack. Sit down. Judge Anderson bellowed. Bailiff, secure the defendant. I wasn't done with Evans. I had one more nail for his coffin. You aren't a doctor, are you, Evans? I asked, my voice deadly calm amidst the chaos. Evans collapsed back into the chair, sobbing into his hands. No, I was a pharmacist. They took my license. I had gambling, debts. Jared said he would pay them off. He said it was just sleeping pills. Please, I didn't want to kill anyone. You're a disgraced pharmacist practicing medicine without a license and conspiring to commit murder, I said, turning my back on him. I have nothing further for this witness, Your Honor. But I believe the state police might. Judge Anderson looked at Evans with pure disgust. Bailiff, Anderson said, his voice ice cold. Take Mr. Evans into custody. Charge him with practicing without a license, fraud, and attempted murder, and read him his rights. He is going to need them. Two bailiffs moved in. They hauled Evans out of the witness box. He was weeping, begging, his legs dragging on the floor. The click of the handcuffs echoed through the silent room. I stood in the center of the well, adjusting my cufflinks. I looked at Victoria. Her face was gray. She looked like a statue of terror. She knew. She knew that Evans had just handed me the weapon to destroy them. Jared was staring at the empty witness chair, his mouth agape. The arrogance was gone. The smugness had evaporated. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a trapdoor. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, I said. That was the appetizer. Now, if the court pleases, I would like to move on to the main course. The money. Judge Anderson nodded slowly. Proceed, Mr. Caldwell. I walked back to the counsel table. Sarah handed me the next file. The financial records. The bank transfers. The smoking gun that would prove my daughter and her husband hadn't just tried to kill me. They had tried to rob my corpse before I was even dead. I looked at the USB drive in my hand. It felt heavy. I called Jared Miller to the stand. I said. The hunt continued, and I wasn't leaving until the cage was full. The bailiffs were still dragging the sobbing Dr. Evans out of the courtroom when I turned my attention back to the defense table. The air in the room was electric, charged with the ozone smell of a storm that had finally broken. Victoria was no longer looking at me with disdain. She was looking at me with the wide, terrified eyes of a deer realizing the headlights are attached to a semi-truck. Jared, however, was trying to rally. He straightened his tie. It was a flimsy mask, cracking at the edges, but it was all he had left. I called Jared Miller to the stand, I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs of the gallery. Jared stood up. He buttoned his jacket, a nervous tic I had noticed years ago. He walked to the stand with a swagger that was entirely unearned, trying to project the image of a successful businessman who was simply misunderstood. He took the oath, his hand resting on the Bible, swearing to tell the truth. The irony was thick enough to choke on. He sat down, adjusting the microphone. He looked at the jury box, flashing a charming, boyish smile that had probably worked on his mother, but was useless here. Mr. Miller, I began, standing behind the podium, resting my hands on the wood. Let us clarify your role in my life over the past 3 months. You moved into my home. You took control of my schedule. You managed my affairs. Is that correct? Jared nodded solemnly. Yes, Harry. I mean, Mr. Caldwell. Victoria and I, we just wanted to help. You were grieving. You were confused. We stepped in to shoulder the burden. We only wanted what was best for you. What was best for me, I repeated, letting the phrase hang in the air. You are a devoted son-in-law, then. Selfless. I try to be, Jared said, lowering his head modestly. Family comes first. I walked over to the counsel table. Sarah handed me a remote control. I pointed it at the large projection screen mounted on the wall to the left of the judge's bench. Let us talk about my car, Jared. My 1967 Shelby Mustang. You told me you took it for service. You told me it was unsafe for me to drive. Jared shifted in his seat. Yes, that's right. The brakes were shot. The steering was loose. I was protecting you. I clicked the remote. A document appeared on the screen. It was a bill of sale, dated the morning after my car disappeared. It was signed by Jared Miller. The buyer was listed as Exotic Auto Salvage. The sale price was $80,000. Cash. This is a bill of sale, Jared, I said, my voice hard. You didn't take it to a mechanic. You sold a $220,000 car to a chop shop for $80,000 in cash. Is that how you protect me? By liquidating my assets for pennies on the dollar. Jared's face flushed a deep, ugly red. I had to. The repairs were too expensive. I was going to put the money back into the house upkeep. It was a financial decision. A financial decision, I echoed. I see. I clicked the remote again. A new document appeared. It was a digital bank statement from an offshore gambling website called BetKing. The account was registered to Jared Miller. The date was the same day as the car sale. The deposit amount was exactly $80,000. Can you explain to the court, Mr. Oswald Miller, how depositing the proceeds of my stolen car into an online poker account constitutes house upkeep? The courtroom gasped. It was a collective intake of breath. Jared opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at his lawyer, Mr. Sterling. But Sterling was busy studying his fingernails, clearly realizing he wasn't getting paid enough for this disaster. I have a system. Jared stammered, sweat beading on his upper lip. I was trying to grow the money for you, to help with your medical bills. You were gambling with my property. I said, cutting him off. You stole my car. You sold it. You gambled the money. That is grand larceny. But that is just the tip of the iceberg, isn't it? I didn't wait for an answer. I clicked the remote again. The screen filled with a spreadsheet. It was the transaction history of the Caldwell Family Trust. Rows and rows of numbers, but I had highlighted a specific set of transfers in bright yellow. $450,000, I said, reading the total at the bottom. Over the course of 12 weeks, you transferred nearly $500,000 from my retirement trust to a JN5 Consulting LLC. I turned to look at him. Tell us, Jared, what is JN5 Consulting? Is it a medical firm? A law firm? Jared was gripping the arms of the witness chair so hard his knuckles were white. It's a management company. We handle logistics, lifestyle curation. It's legitimate. We bill for our time, for the stress. Taking care of you is a full-time job. Lifestyle curation. I scoffed. I clicked the remote one more time. The screen changed to show the corporate registration for JN5 Consulting. The registered address was my own house. The offices were Jared Miller and Victoria Caldwell. You incorporated a shell company using my address, I said, my voice rising, thundering through the room. You paid yourselves $500,000 to feed me oatmeal and cut my phone lines. You charged me $450,000 to hold me prisoner in my own home. That is not management, Jared. That is embezzlement. That is wire fraud. Jared was shaking now. He looked small. He looked pathetic. But he wasn't done. He had one last desperate lie in him. You don't understand, he cried out, his voice cracking. We earned that money. You were difficult. You were violent. You don't remember because you were sick. But we did everything for you. We loved you. We were only trying to make you comfortable before the end. Before the end, I repeated softly. I walked back to the table. I picked up the small USB drive I had hidden under the toilet tank lid. I held it up. It glinted under the courtroom lights. You claimed you wanted me comfortable. You claimed you loved me. You claimed I was sick. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, I have one final piece of evidence to present. This is an audio recording. It was captured by a voice-activated recorder I planted in the dining room of my home 3 weeks ago, on the night my daughter and son-in-law threw a party to celebrate my imminent demise. I handed the drive to the court clerk. She plugged it into the system. Jared's eyes went wide. He started to stand up. No. You can't. That's illegal. Sit down. Judge Anderson barked. Play the recording. The clock pressed play. For a moment, there was only the sound of static and the clinking of glasses. Then Jared's voice filled the courtroom. It was loud, slurred with alcohol, booming from the speakers with crystal clarity. To the new owners. Jared's recorded voice shouted. A chorus of voices replied. Then Victoria's voice. God, I thought he would never go to sleep. Did you give him the double dose? Yeah, Jared's voice replied, followed by a cruel, wet laugh. His out cold, drooling on the pillow. Look, babe, don't worry. The realtor said we can list it next week. Once we dump him at Sunny Meadows, the place is ours. Then came the line, the sentence that sucked the air out of the room. Honestly, Jared's voice said, dropping lower, darker. The old man is just taking up space. The sooner he kicks the bucket, the better. He's worth more dead than he is alive anyway. Why wait for nature? Dr. Evans said the liver failure will look natural. Just another week, babe. Just another week and we are free. The recording ended. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. Jared was frozen in the witness chair. His face was gray. He looked like a man who had just watched his own execution. I looked at him. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a deep, cold sorrow. This was the man my daughter had chosen. This was the man I had welcomed into my family. You didn't just want my money, Jared, I said, my voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the room. You wanted my life. You joked about my murder while drinking my wine. Jared slumped. He collapsed in on himself, sliding down in the chair until his chin hit his chest. He began to weep, ugly, gasping sobs. It wasn't my idea, he blubbered, pointing a shaking finger at the plaintiff's table. It was her. It was Victoria. She said she hated you. She said she wanted the money. She made me get the pills. Victoria screamed. It was a feral animal sound. You coward. You liar. It was ***. You sold the car. You found the doctor. Don't you dare put this on me. She lunged at him. She actually tried to climb over the table to get to him. Her lawyer had to grab her by the waist to hold her back. Order. Judge Anderson was standing now, banging his gavel so hard I thought the handle would snap. Bailiffs, restrain them. 2 bailiffs grabbed Victoria. 2 more moved toward Jared in the witness box. I stood in the center of the storm, untouched. I watched them turn on each other. The love they claimed to have, the partnership, the united front. It all disintegrated the moment the light of truth hit it. They were rats in a bucket, clawing over each other to escape the rising water. I looked at Judge Anderson. He looked back at me, his expression grim. I think we have heard enough, Mr. Caldwell, the judge said. I nodded. I think so too, Your Honor. The prosecution rests. As the bailiffs hauled Jared out of the chair and handcuffed him, he looked at me one last time. His eyes were begging. Harry, please. I'm family. I looked at him. I looked at the handcuffs. I looked at the weeping, screaming woman who used to be my daughter. No, Jared, I said, cold and final. You are just a defendant. I turned my back on them and walked to the bench. The hunt was over. The prey was captured. Now it was time for the sentence. The chaos in the courtroom subsided into a suffocating silence as the bailiffs pulled Jared back into his seat. He was sobbing now, a broken man who had realized too late that he was never the player, only the pawn. But I wasn't finished. I turned my back on him. He was no longer relevant. My focus shifted to the woman sitting next to him. My daughter, Victoria. She was trembling. Her face, usually so composed and mask-like with expensive makeup, was streaked with tears and mascara. She looked up at me, and for a fleeting second, I saw the little girl I used to push on the swings in the backyard. But that image burned away instantly, replaced by the memory of her voice in the kitchen telling me to dissipate. I didn't return to the podium. I walked right up to the plaintiff's table. I placed my hands on the wood, leaning in until I was inches from her face. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. In my courtroom, the quietest voice was always the most dangerous. Victoria, look at me, I commanded. She shook her head, staring at her lap. Look at me, I repeated, my voice cracking like a whip. She flinched and slowly raised her eyes. They were filled with terror. You fired Mrs. Higgins, I said softly. She worked for us for 30 years. She ironed your prom dress. She made you soup when you had the chicken pox. She held your mother's hand when she took her last breath. And you threw her out on the street like garbage because she was an inconvenience to your theft. You accuse a good woman of stealing a spoon to cover your own crimes. Victoria opened her mouth to speak, to lie, but I cut her off. And the plant, I continued, my voice dropping an octave. Your mother's snake plant. The one thing in that house that was still living, still growing, still hers. You didn't just poison me, Victoria. You practiced on her memory. You poured arsenic into the soil of the one thing your mother loved, just to see if it would work on me. You killed a piece of her soul to get to my wallet. I didn't mean to, she whimpered. It was just, we needed. You needed. I scoffed. And then, when you had stolen my car and my money and my dignity, you decided to discard me. Sunny Meadows, $800 a month. That was the price tag you put on my life. You were going to sell the home I built with your mother for millions. And you were going to lock me in a room that smelled of urine and despair to save a few pennies. You were going to let me rot alone in the dark while you drank champagne in my living room. I straightened up, looking down at her with a mixture of pity and revulsion. I have spent 40 years on the bench, Victoria. I have seen murderers, thieves, and liars. I have seen the worst of humanity. But I have never seen a betrayal as cold as this. I turned to address the gallery, to address the judge, to address the world. I could forgive a daughter who was foolish with money. I could forgive a daughter who made mistakes. I could even forgive a daughter who was selfish. But I cannot forgive the person who killed the father in her mind to trade him for a house. You didn't just want my assets, Victoria. You wanted my erasure. And that is a crime against nature. I walked back to the center of the well and faced Judge Anderson. The prosecution rests, Your Honor. Judge Anderson took off his glasses. He looked old. He looked tired. He looked at Victoria and Jared with a disdain that was palpable. He didn't need to consult legal texts. He didn't need a recess. He picked up his gavel. It hung heavy in the air, a hammer of judgment poised to fall. The court has heard the evidence, Judge Anderson said, his voice echoing in the vaulted ceiling. And frankly, in my 20 years on the bench, I have rarely been so disgusted. The petitioners came here seeking guardianship over a man they claimed was incompetent. Instead, they have proven that the only incompetence in this room lies in their inability to conceal their own malice. He looked at the defense table. The petition for emergency guardianship is denied with prejudice. Furthermore, based on the overwhelming evidence presented by Mr. Caldwell, including the toxicology reports, financial records, and audio recordings, this court is taking immediate action. Victoria stood up, her hands shaking. Your Honor, please, we can explain. Sit down, Miss Caldwell. Anderson barked. You will have plenty of time to explain, but not to me. He turned to the court clerk. The court hereby revokes any and all powers of attorney held by Victoria Caldwell and Jared Miller regarding Harrison Caldwell. All assets transferred to JN5 Consulting are frozen effective immediately. Then he looked at the bailiffs. Officers, take Victoria Caldwell and Jared Miller into custody. They are to be held without bail pending charges from the district attorney's office. I am recommending charges of elder abuse, grand larceny, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree. No! Victoria screamed. It was a raw, piercing sound. No! You can't. Daddy, tell him. Tell him we're family. Judge Anderson wasn't finished. Furthermore, he continued, his voice rising over her screams, I am issuing a judicial order invalidating any existing wills or trust agreements that name Victoria Caldwell or Jared Miller as beneficiaries. Under the Slayer statute principles, a person cannot inherit from the one they attempted to destroy. You leave this courtroom with nothing. No house, no money, no legacy. The gavel came down. Bang! It was the sound of a steel door slamming shut. 2 bailiffs moved in on Victoria. 2 more grabbed Jared. They pulled them from their chairs. Jared was limp, dead weight, sobbing quietly. But Victoria fought. She thrashed, her expensive suit tearing, her hair coming loose from its severe bun. "Daddy!" she shrieked, reaching out a hand toward me. "Daddy, please. I'm your little girl. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. Please don't let them take me." I stood there, stone-faced. I watched the handcuffs click around her wrists. The sound was sharp. Final. Click. Click. "Daddy, help me." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had fed me gruel. The woman who had laughed when she thought I was losing my mind. The woman who had tried to bury me before I was dead. I didn't say a word. I didn't blink. I simply turned my back. I faced the judge's bench, straightening my tie. Behind me, the screams continued, desperate and shrill, fading as they dragged her toward the side door, toward the holding cells, toward the life she had earned. "Mr. Caldwell," Judge Anderson said softly. "I'm sorry." I looked up at him. "I'm not, Your Honor. The law has been served." I walked to the counsel table and began to pack my briefcase. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. The courtroom began to empty, the spectators murmuring in shock. But I didn't hear them. I only heard the silence where my daughter used to be. It was a heavy silence, a painful silence, but it was clean. It was the silence of a tumor that had finally been cut out. Sarah put a hand on my arm. "Are you all right, Harry?" I looked at the empty door where the bailiffs had taken them. "I will be, Sarah. I will be." I picked up my briefcase. I walked down the center aisle, my footsteps echoing on the marble. I walked out of the courtroom and into the rest of my life. The ride back to Lake Forest was quiet, but it was a silence filled with peace, not tension. The sun was beginning to dip low in the sky, casting long, golden shadows across the lawns of the estates we passed. When Sarah's car turned into my driveway, I felt a physical weight lift off my chest. The house, which for 3 months had been a prison of gaslighting and cruelty, looked different now. It looked like mine again. The windows weren't eyes watching me. They were just windows, reflecting the sunset. As the car came to a stop, the front door opened. A figure stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on a familiar floral apron. It was Mrs. Higgins. Sarah had called her immediately after the verdict. She stood there, her face crumpling with emotion as I stepped out of the car. She didn't wait for decorum. She ran down the steps, moving faster than I had ever seen her move, and threw her arms around me. "Welcome home, Mr. Harrison," she sobbed into my shoulder. "Welcome home." I patted her back, feeling the sting of tears welling in my own eyes. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Higgins," I whispered. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you sooner." She pulled back, wiping her eyes with the corner of her apron. "You protected me just fine, so. That check you gave me kept a roof over my head. And now, I've made you a pot roast. A real one. No porridge. And I threw out every single thing they touched. The house is clean." I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had felt in months. "Thank you, Mrs. Higgins. You're rehired, with a raise and a pension. You are never leaving this house until you want to." She nodded, too choked up to speak, and ushered me inside. The house smelled of lemon polish and slow-cooked beef. The stench of Jared's cheap body spray and Victoria's cloying perfume was gone, scrubbed away by the woman who truly loved this home. But there was one more reunion I needed. I walked through the kitchen and out to the garage. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the door handle, not from weakness, but from anticipation. I pulled it open. There it was, my 1967 Shelby Mustang GT500, midnight blue with white racing stripes. The police had located it at the chop shop Jared had sold it to. The owner of the shop, realizing he had bought a stolen vehicle from a man now facing federal charges, had been all too eager to return it to the authorities to avoid being named as an accomplice. It sat there, gleaming under the fluorescent lights, a sleeping beast waiting for its master. I ran my hand over the cold metal of the fender. It was safe. I was safe. I went back inside, to the library. Sarah was waiting for me there, sitting at my desk, my clean, uncluttered desk. She had a bottle of my 50-year-old Scotch open and 2 glasses poured. "To victory," she said, raising a glass. To justice, I corrected, clinking my glass against hers. She opened a leather folder. We need to talk about the future, Harry. With Victoria and Jared out of the picture, your estate plan is currently void. We need to restructure. I sat down in my leather chair. It felt like reclaiming a throne. I looked at the room, at the books, at the legacy Catherine and I had built. I don't want to leave it to distant relatives I haven't seen in 20 years, I said. And I certainly won't leave it to the state. What do you want to do? Sarah asked, pen poised. I thought about the young law students I used to mentor. I thought about the people like Sarah, who came from nothing and fought their way up with grit and integrity. I thought about Catherine, who had spent her life advocating for the voiceless. Create a trust, I said firmly. The Catherine Caldwell Legal Scholarship Fund. Sarah began writing. And the beneficiary, full tuition and living stipends for underprivileged law students who demonstrate a commitment to public defense and elder law. I want to fund the fighters, Sarah. I want to fund the people who will stand up for the old men being drugged in their own homes. And the assets, she asked. Everything, I said. The investment portfolio, the bonds, the liquidation value of this house when I eventually pass. The total estate. Sarah looked up, her eyes wide. Harry, that is over $12 million. I know, I said, taking a sip of the scotch. It burned pleasantly on its way down. $12 million that Victoria killed her soul to get. $12 million that Jared gambled his freedom for. It will never touch their hands. It will go to building a generation of lawyers who will put people like them behind bars. Sarah smiled. It was a vicious, satisfied smile. Catherine would love that. Yes, I said, looking at the photo of my wife on the desk. She would. We signed the papers right there. In 10 minutes, I had disinherited my bloodline and adopted a legacy of justice. It was done. The final seal on the tomb of their greed. Sarah left around sunset. I stood on the porch and watched her drive away. The house was quiet, but it wasn't lonely. Mrs. Higgins was humming in the kitchen. The ghost of Catherine felt near, approving. But I wasn't ready to sit down. I wasn't ready to be the old man in the armchair. I had spent 3 months being a prisoner in my own body, a prisoner in my own home. I needed to feel the world moving. I walked out to the garage. I opened the driver's side door of the Mustang and slid into the leather bucket seat. It fit me like a glove. I inserted the key into the ignition. I turned it. The V8 engine roared to life. It was a guttural, aggressive sound, a lion waking up. The vibration hummed through the chassis, up through the seat, into my spine. It was the heartbeat of freedom. I hit the button for the garage door. As it rolled up, revealing the twilight sky, I shifted into gear. I backed out of the driveway, the tires crunching on the gravel. I drove slow through the neighborhood, past the manicured lawns and the silent houses. But when I reached Lakeshore Drive, I let it go. I pressed the accelerator. The car surged forward, pinning me back in the seat. The engine held. I watched the speedometer climb. 40, 60, 80. I rolled the window down. The wind off Lake Michigan was cold and sharp. It whipped through the cabin, blowing my silver hair back, stinging my eyes, filling my lungs with air that tasted of water and vastness. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I didn't see a victim. I didn't see a fragile senior citizen. I didn't see the clueless old man Jared had laughed at. I saw Harrison Caldwell. I saw the gavel. I had walked through the fire of betrayal. I had been poisoned by my own flesh and blood. I had been stripped of my rights and my dignity, but I hadn't broken. I had waited. I had planned. And I had struck back with the full weight of the law. I looked at the road stretching out ahead of me, endless and open. The streetlights blurred into streaks of gold. I was alone, yes, but I was free. I had reclaimed my life from the jaws of greed. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, feeling the power of the machine, the power of my own agency. They thought they could erase me. They thought I was a footnote in their story of wealth. But they were wrong. I was the author of the whole damn book. I smiled. And this time, it wasn't for a performance. It was for me. Justice. I thought as the city lights danced on the dark water of the lake, doesn't always come from a courtroom. It doesn't always come from a jury or a verdict. Sometimes justice comes from the patience of a father who refuses to die. Sometimes it comes from the quiet, burning resolve of a man who knows exactly who he is. I shifted gears, the engine screaming in triumph, and drove into the night, alive, awake, and victorious. This whole ordeal, it taught me the most painful lesson. Family is not a shield for cruelty. Sharing blood does not give anyone the right to strip away your dignity. I once thought enduring in silence was an act of love, but I realized that setting boundaries is the only way to survive. Never let anyone extinguish your light, even if they are your own flesh and blood. True justice isn't just found in a courtroom verdict. It is found in the quiet courage to stand up and reclaim your honor when you are backed into a corner. So, tell me, what do you think? Have you ever faced a betrayal that forced you to rediscover your own strength? What would you have done in my place? Let me know in the comments below. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching. Take care. Good luck.